Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we are going to try to compose a two-part invention from some given material, and I'm going to do this in a kind of Baroque style. So sometimes people preparing for exams where they've got to do this kind of thing, it's often in Baroque style, so that's why I'm focusing it there. But the principles of this could work in any style. And lots of people are very happy writing homophonic music, thinking in chords, thinking vertically, but sometimes we want to think in a more linear fashion. So that's where the counterpoint comes in, really. So I've given you a kind of opening with lots of kind of prepared materials, a kind of skeleton score if you like, and it's the kind of presentation that's often made in kind of music exam situations. So for those who are preparing to do this kind of thing, this is the kind of deal you might be facing, and I just want to work it through live with you so you could get some idea how to do this. But if you're not interested in Baroque style and you're not preparing for an exam, it really doesn't matter. There's still a great deal to be absorbed from thinking through how music sometimes works in this more linear, contrapuntal way. And therefore, if you want to write using some of this, how do we go about it? Well, first of all, let's have a little look at what we've been given. And you'll notice that very quickly you can see certain ideas that keep coming round. But let me play you the skeleton score. It's going to sound a bit strange because it's got lots of holes in it, but this is what we've got so far. Okay, so it sounds a bit odd because it's got so many holes in it. But what are the ideas in this piece that are being imitated? Because that's often how counterpoint works. Let me show you what I mean. So for example, at the beginning, we have this idea. And then you'll notice in the left hand, the same idea is copied. Okay, now it's not exactly the same. We can have strict counterpoint or free counterpoint. In strict counterpoint, you're much more likely to keep all these intervals the same and transfer it exactly. In free counterpoint, there's nothing to say that you can't change an interval, but it might still be recognizable as the same motif. Well, if you listen to these two things that I've put in blue brackets so far, you can see that they're instantly recognizable as the same thing visually. You've got these three ascending notes as notes 2, 3, and 4, and then you've got a leap at the beginning. But you'll notice in the first little bit, we've got in the treble clef, we've got a rising fourth. When it comes in the left hand, in the bass clef, that fourth has changed to a rising third. But it's still the same idea. Here it is with a fourth, and here it is with a third. Same rhythm, same melodic pattern, but it's perfectly possible to modify intervals. Now you might say, why would I want to modify the intervals? And this is a key thing to think about. When we get to writing counterpoint, quite often people get carried away with, oh, this is a great idea and I can imitate that here in the other hand a bar later or in a different instrument or a different voice. But actually the resulting harmony is a bit of a mess. And one thing you have to think about is, well, what's going on with the harmony? Now, when you look at the first bar of this thing, you'll see really that it's all tonic chord harmony. So we're in the key of C major. So that C major tonic chord, C, E, G, well, harmony, harmony, passing, harmony, 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 and then these could be a different chord or they could be about passing notes. But you see why I've modified the left hand interval so that we've still got notes that belong to that chord 1 in C major. And going on with the chords, you'll see in the second bar, well, really, we've got a chord 5 there, and we're going back to a chord 1 in the second half of the bar. So it's quite useful to think chords. So notes are either going to belong to those chords, or they're going to be inessential notes, passing notes, auxiliary notes, to decorate it. So whatever you do in your imitation, well, the harmony's got to make sense. Anyway, looking at these bracketed things, this is the motif, if you like, in this piece that's being imitated quite a lot. Let's see where else it comes. Well, you can sort of see, can't you, that we've got it again here going into the next line. So you see this in the right hand. That's recognizable as the same thing as well. Now, do you see what's happened this time? The opening interval is going up a 6. And then we've got the 3 notes ascending, and we've got this dotted note at the end. So it's clearly recognizable as the same figure, isn't it? But what was a 4th in the right hand at the beginning became a 3rd in the left hand. Now it's become a 6 in the right hand. I'm trying to do this in such a way to show you how flexible you can be with the thing. Okay, let's go on and see how much more flexible we can be. If we now look at this figure, you might think, well, what's that really got to do with those opening figures? You know, if I look at, well, if you compare with, this is a rising figure, this is a falling figure with a rising leap at the end. So in many ways, it's a little bit different, but it's still recognizable. It's the same kind of rhythmic idea, isn't it? Starting on the second half of the beat. And it's a kind of inversion of the original thing. So you might say, well, is it the original motif, or is it some modification of the original motif? Doesn't matter, it's perfectly okay. Now, you'll notice this one I've just bracketed. When we look in the next bar, we've got the same thing again, but this time it's in sequence. So we had this in the 4th bar, and then in the 5th bar, it's the same thing, a tone lower. So that's interesting, isn't it? And you can also just think in terms of key. When we look in the 4th bar, you see this F sharp. You think, oh, what's happening here? Looks like we're kind of going 5-1 in the key of G. And if that's true, and the next bar is doing the same thing down a tone, well, we're probably going 5-1 in the key of F. So beginning to think about, oh, what's happening with a harmony is quite useful, isn't it? And while we're at it, we'll just look at the 3rd bar. Well, it looks as if we're still using chord 1 at the beginning, and then going to 5, or probably 5-7 in the second half of that bar. So you can see what's happening there. Okay, let's carry on our search for this motif. Now, what about this little figure here? That looks as if it's related, doesn't it? You know, on the second line in bar 4 we saw, and then in bar 5, and now in this bar, it's the same rhythm, you see. It's modified again, isn't it? So just this notion that you don't have to be absolutely religious about repeating the same figure. There are ways in which it might modify, transform, invert, but still be recognizable as the same basic idea. And then you'll notice in the left hand, we've got this. Okay, so that's still recognizable, isn't it, as the same motif. And then when I come onto the bottom line, well, what about this in the left hand? Do you see this one? That's exactly the same as the first left hand one we had up in bar 1 going into bar 2. And then on this bottom line, the right hand is following it through there as well. Now, you can see where that might be going, can't you? So you can see actually it might be indicating what the next note is. So once you've kind of seen this, you might think, well, you know what? I think that's going to be a D. Because that flows on melodically, doesn't it? If the left hand is going C, E, F, G, well, the right hand might be going G, B, C, D. So sometimes when you're doing this, kind of plotting of where the figure comes, you might think, oh, I can just fill in a note there because that seems to flow on. Now, you could also say that this figure in the left hand is also part of the motif. So you get the idea anyway. All the way through this piece, we've got this little motif that gets used. Now, in between that, we get other ideas, don't we? So, for example, you know, as a sort of secondary idea, we've got this thing. So if I put that in dots, and then you sort of think, oh, actually, you know what? That's also kind of being used a bit here, isn't it? So we can see that there's a link between this on the first line and on the second line. It's exactly the same thing, a third higher, isn't it? So there's a bit of sequence there. And then what about, you know, things like this? When you've got, it's not far from the same idea, is it? And little snippets of it, like this in the left hand, which is just, you can see is not unrelated to it. So you begin to see how this sort of contrapuntal style often works, particularly in the context of a two-part invention. But if it was a three-part invention, the same kind of process would be working. And so it's about sort of flushing out what are the kind of motivic ideas that we're going to use when we go about actually, you know, fulfilling the task. And also at the same time, just thinking, keep an eye on the harmony so that when we imitate ideas, we're going to make sure that we're doing that in such a way that those ideas belong to the prevailing chord. Otherwise, we're going to end up with some very strange sounding things. Now, it looks to me, just to finish off some harmony, as if when we come here, we're perhaps thinking, you know, we're going to be 5-1 again in C. So do you see how there's a kind of harmonic sequence? We've gone 5-1 in G, then we've gone 5-1 in F, now we're going 5-1 in C again. And, you know, that's a fairly expected modulatory path, if you like, isn't it? We're in C major, we've modulated to G major, the dominant key, we've come back through F major, the subdominant key, and now we're back in C major again. And then just to sort of carry on with this, well, this is looking like chord 5. Looks like it might be doing that throughout the whole bar. And then this is looking like a chord 1. And then this is looking like a chord 5. So there's nothing too complicated about the harmony. It looks as if by the time we start this next bar that this is a kind of 2B. And then we've got an F sharp in the bass. So could it be that this is going 5B to 1 in G? So it's a little bit of a secondary dominant into G. But then the 1 in G is also 5 in C. So we go back to chord 5 and then we maybe have 1. And then we're probably going to go, certainly go 5 there and 1 there. We could start the last bar with a 1C, or there's another option which I might come back to later. But we're not sort of trying to write a piece of harmony and then kind of fit in a bit of loose counterpoint. We're trying to write counterpoint, but we're trying to be aware of what the harmony is. Otherwise, we'll be imitating things at all sorts of funny pitches, wondering why it sounds strange. Okay, well, having sort of done the spade work, because when you're working from a skeleton score like this, it's good to be analytical about the given material so we know what we're working with. Let's go on now and see if we can put some notes in and do some of this imitation. Well, what's happened at the beginning? Well, in the first bar, the right hand has done, left hand has imitated, the right hand has imitated. Now, it doesn't have to carry on alternating hands, but on the other hand, that's a pattern at the beginning. So the next thing that might happen is some imitation in the left hand. And if you have a look in bar 3, you can see in the right hand we've got this dotted crotchet, this dotted quarter note, followed by the 2 semiquavers, the 2 16th notes. And at the end of bar 1, the left hand did a bit of an imitation while the right hand was using that rhythm. So maybe we can do something like this. So if I just expand this bar a little bit, well, how about we try to get the figure from bar 1 to work in here. Something like this. Now, do you see what I've done there? By writing those notes in there, that is using the same motif, isn't it? And I've transposed it so that it fits with the harmony. So I've got the E and the G belonging to chord 1. The A is a passing note. The B goes on to be part of this 5 or this 5/7 at the end of the bar. And it all fits in with the pattern that we had in the left hand at the beginning. So there's a little bit of imitation that works there, isn't it? Now, you might compose this A to Z, but there's a lot to be said for thinking, where did these motifs come? And then you can fill in the gaps later on. So let's look at what comes next. And we notice in the second line, we've got this right hand going A, F sharp, D, G, and then the sequence we talked about, G, E, C, F. So can we get the left hand to do some imitation of that? Well, we could have the left hand imitating in exactly the same way as the right hand, or we could do something to vary it. So how about we try doing this? If we try to invert the left hand, so you'll see what I'm doing here. This is about chord 1 in G, we've decided. So do you see what I'm writing now? We've just had in the right hand A, F sharp, D, G. So I'm taking that figure, imposing it on chord 1 in G and turning it upside down. So we had this descending triad, and on the left hand I'm using an ascending triad. Okay, so I need to finish that off in some way. So, well, for argument's sake, let's put a C in the beginning of the next bar for now. We can change our mind about that if we want to, but that will do nicely. And then we said, well, we've got this sequence, haven't we? Because we've had 5/1 in the key of G. Now we've got 5/1 in the key of F. So I wonder if that left-hand figure will play out if we put that down a note as well. And then if I go on to the next bit, I need a chord 5 or a 5/7 in the key of C. So going on to a B there would work quite well. So do you see what we've now got from the 4th bar? So you see how I've used the motif, but the bass is an inversion of the right hand motif. Okay, well, we'll skip a bit out for now and let's go on to the next bit of imitation. So if we now look at the 3rd line, we can see the right hand has got this A, G, E, D, and the left hand goes D, B, G, F. So could the right hand now be imitating that figure? I think it could be. We're on chord 5 in the key of C. So why not do this? If we put that in the right hand, that's a nice imitation of it, isn't it? So we've now got and that flows on very nicely to the next note that we've been given in the right hand as well, doesn't it? Okay, now is there anything else we can imitate before we're done? And then we can go back and just sort of complete the gaps. Well, what about this bit at the end? You know, the right hand goes. I wonder if we can imitate that. I think we could actually. You know, so this is a little bit loose, but how about we do this? And then it could go on to this note. Yeah, I think we're in business here. Okay, so that's going to be a group there. And you can see how this A, C, D, B is sort of related to G, B, C, D that goes before it. Okay, and then we've just got the last cadence to finish off. But do you see what we've done now? we haven't just kind of started at the first bar and filled in all the notes. We've thought about how the counterpoint is going to work by how we're kind of imitating this idea. And then we can say after that, well, we don't have to have everything fitting with that. So now we could just fill in the gaps. But for now, before we go on, let me just play you where we've got to with the scores so far. And so on, and then the bass just finishes off at the end, and we've got to write this last cadence. Well, you might actually decide that you want to write the last cadence next. You don't have to do this starting from the beginning. And really, we just need to finish off the piece here, don't we? We've got a nice strong bass line at the end. Let's look at these last two bars. So we've got so far in the penultimate bar. Well, why don't we just finish off by having other notes that belong to the harmony. So it could be down to a G. And then maybe, because we've got plenty of movement in the left hand, I could just have a crotchet, a quarter note there. And then one thing I could do is tie that over because we're coming to a cadence. And how about this? I said I'd had a little idea that I was going to share with you, that we treat this as a 4/3 suspension. It's a very common Baroque thing to do, but it's rather nice to have it as a cadence point like this. And then we can just finish off like that. So now the last two bars sound like this. I'm just trying to get a strong cadence out of it. Sounds perfectly all right. You might think actually the last bar sounds a bit plain, so could we spruce it up a bit? Well, we could decorate it, couldn't we? We could do something like this, for example. So we just kind of decorate that last bar and we use a rhythm, that pair of semiquavers or pair of 16th notes that we've seen in that sort of secondary motive earlier. And if you want to just make it really Baroque, well, why not stick a lower mordant at the end? Oh, how about that? That's got a nice kind of Baroque feel to it now, hasn't it? So, you know, we've written the end before we've finished writing the beginning. So it's just a kind of, hopefully this is useful to see the process of how I'm doing this. One thing to watch out for, if you go back to bar 2 for a moment, when you're doing this kind of exercise, it's very easy to leave some kind of incomplete bar. And you'll notice in the left hand, in the second bar, there are only 3 beats at the moment. But, you know, because you've got on to start thinking about bar 3, it's easy to forget that we need to finish off bar 2. So that's not a big job, because all we need to do is to have something else that belongs to chord 1. So that's all I need to do. So in the second bar, just put that C in the bass. And it flows on quite nicely. And then when I'm in bar 3, I just need to finish off that bar. So I need something else that belongs to 5/7. I've got movement in the right hand, so maybe I don't need much movement in the left hand. So I could just stick a G in there, for example. That would do that quite nicely, wouldn't it? Now, I'm really going to a chord 1 or a chord 2B or something. So let's have a C in there because that would fit either, wouldn't it? And then we've got this modulation to G to think about. So probably the best thing I can do here is to write a D in the bass, because that's the root of a chord 5 in G, isn't it? And then if I play you the second line to that point, so bars 3 and 4, that sort of flows on quite nicely, doesn't it? You could have a bit more movement in the left hand if you wanted to. It's up to you. You know, if you wanted, for example, if you don't like those 4 crotchets, those 4 quarter notes, Well, you know, we could do something like this. Just stick another quaver or eighth note in there. Just to get a bit of movement going. And then what are we going to do in this third bar of the second line? Well, we don't have to do anything particularly, having done, but we're also trying to get to F major, so a B flat would be quite useful. So I'm thinking actually what we might do in this bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, bar 5, is to put a B flat in the left hand, so it pulls us towards this F major tonality. Now, the only thing about doing that, if I put a B flat in there, it sounds a bit left in mid-air then, doesn't it? So I might decide that actually I want to have an A there before I start on the next motif, and that would just help us. So, okay, we can kind of slightly modify what we're doing here, can't we? If I get rid of that rest there and we stick an A in, that will just sort of complete that voice leading in the left hand, that C, B flat, A. And then the new motive statement still works perfectly well, doesn't it? So that's sort of joined all that up, hasn't it? Okay, let's move on to the next bar. Now, all we need to do here is complete some harmony. The right hand is rhythmically quite busy, so the left hand can afford to be kind of more stable. So how about, having started on a 5-7 B, I just go down to a G, so it's an A, a root position chord. And then I can come up to C, because we're now looking for a sort of chord 1 or possibly a 2B there, sorry, a 6. And then what could I do here? Well, I could leave the left hand to have a rest. We could do. And don't be afraid of rest. We always want to put notes in, but sometimes rests work well. You could put something in the left hand there if you wanted to. Do something like that, or you could leave it as a rest. Well, there's one option. Have it as it is, put a rest at the end of the bar. If you're thinking, no, I think I want to have some notes there, well, you could fill in with some notes like this, just to sort of complete that. And that's just running in thirds with the right hand, which is a very useful thing to do. Well, you could have this quaver rest at the beginning of the next bar. And if this were a given material, well, you can't really change that rest. I mean, if you were free to shoot that rest where you could put a B in there, but you could do that, and then the new motive is fresh. And then we've kind of got the whole job going. Okay, well, there are probably other things that we could do to this, but I hope you can see how I've actually worked that exercise. So we end up with something that sounds like this. And there we are. We have a complete two-part invention. So I hope you found that useful if you're wanting to engage with writing two-part inventions, if you're wanting to get better at writing counterpoint, if you're wanting to get better at thinking in a more linear way, but working out how that relates to the underlying harmony. Well, if you found that useful, we've got all sorts of other material on the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. So we have a counterpoint course that takes all this much further, for example. So there's a course that might be tailor-made as a follow-on from what we've done today. If you're thinking, having looked at that, well, actually, I'm not quite sure about my harmony, have a look at our advanced theory course, which is going to make that harmony clearer for you. If you want to be able to hear this stuff better, have a look at the oral dictation course. If you want to get better at doing this stuff under your fingers at the keyboard, have a look at our keyboard harmony course. Lots of things out there that will resource you. If you want to be part of our Maestros group, which we meet together once a month, and there are lots of other perks as well, have a click on the Maestros link on the homepage and you can find out more about that. But anyway, it's great to have you with us as part of this wonderful Music Matters international musical community.